The Vietnam War was one of the deadliest conflicts of the 20th century. It was a nightmare of mud, napalm, and fire, a war that left men and nations scarred and broken. But imagine if that war didn't end when you died. In 1968, something went wrong in the jungle. The dead started coming back to life, not as ghosts, but as rotting, relentless monsters. This is 68, a dark comic drenched in blood, sweat, and terror. So, lock and load. We're crossing enemy lines today, and there's no guarantee we're ever coming back.
Hey guys, I'm your host, Juan, and today we'll be discussing 68. This is a comic that spans several different miniseries and one-shots, and we're starting from the beginning here today. So, that is to say that we're going to begin with the 2006 one-shot and continue on to the 2011 four-issue continuation. Right, so the 68 comic book was written by Mark Kidwell, and it features art done by Nat Jones and colors by Fotos. The series appears to have been a very collaborative effort, so it seems like they all contributed a lot to it. But anyway, before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel in order to stay in the loop with all the latest videos. Alright then, let's jump right in. Our story opens deep in the humid jungles of Vietnam. It's February 13th, 1968, a date well into the heat of the Vietnam War. We see a man writing a letter to his significant other, a girl named Barbara. The man in question here is one Lieutenant Thomas Blake of the U.S. Army, and he is our main protagonist. Blake, by way of letter, tells his girl that he's on an emergency patrol mission, searching for two soldiers who went missing near a Viet Cong-occupied village. But the lieutenant is not alone. His team consists of 4 other men, and we are introduced to them. There is the medic, who goes by the nickname Band-Aid, who seems a little apprehensive about the whole mission. There is also Lieutenant Blake's number 2, Bronto, a highly experienced weapons guy. He's the black guy, by the way. Also on the team here is a new guy named Man, who's kind of arrogant and hot-headed. He's the one wearing a helmet that says Meat Grinder on it. You'll see more clearly later on, but I just don't want you to get confused, because he looks very similar to Lieutenant Blake. Anyway, rounding out the cast is a silent man in a mustache named Benitez, and he's the radio man, meaning he's the one responsible for communicating with the base and air support. In any event, the men get a move on, but before they do so, the new guy, Man, notices that the lieutenant is clutching a bullet, which has the number 68 carved into it. You see, during the Vietnam War, men were drafted for a year-long tour, and when such men had less than 100 days left, they were considered what is called short, which was basically an informal countdown they had until they got to go back home. Soldiers who were short often did personal good luck rituals, and in Lieutenant Blake's case, every day he etches into a bullet the amount of days he has left, and at the end of that day, he fires it into the ground. But in any case, the crew is mobile now, and Bronto scouts out ahead, while Band-Aid confides his uncomfortability with the impulsive and bloodthirsty Man. But before the lieutenant can calm his nerves, Bronto returns with a wild look in his eyes, eager to show everyone what he's just discovered. And so we see that they have come upon what appears to be a severely wounded Vietnamese man. He's incredibly fucked up looking, with discolored skin and yellowish eyes, leading the soldiers to figure he got napalmed or something. Man is about to reactively shoot the guy, but he's reprimanded because they don't want nearby Viet Cong to hear the gunshots. Instead, Bronto steps in and skillfully lobs a throwing knife at the man. It lodges into the guy's throat, but everyone freezes in disbelief because the Vietnamese man is still standing, making incoherent grunts. So the soldiers throw caution to the wind and open fire on the guy in a panic. An array of bullets tear into him, but to the crew's abject horror, he still stands. So man steadies himself and discharges a shot at the freak's head, exploding it and finally putting him down. Afterwards, the lieutenant, Bronto, and Band-Aid survey the dead body while Man and Benitez keep watch. Band-Aid carefully inspects the corpse, and what he reports back is truly disturbing. There is very strong evidence to suggest that the Vietnamese man's body was already in rigor mortis, meaning that the guy was already dead. The men are big time spooked out, and Bronto thinks that this must be some voodoo shit, but Lieutenant Blake tells everyone to keep this information to themselves, and so they decide to keep moving forward because they still have a job to accomplish. Okay, these guys are taking the whole dead coming back to life thing way too casually. Regardless, the unit eventually reaches the village they were looking for, and they begin rummaging through it, searching for the missing soldiers they were tasked to find. It's clear that the enemy was here at one point, but now the village seems eerily abandoned. Man, for his part, notices a blood trail, which he follows into one of the huts, and what he sees inside forces him to vomit. It's the missing soldiers, all right, strung up by ropes, but partially disemboweled and surrounded by an army of flies. The men are absolutely outraged that the Viet Cong would do this, and the lieutenant orders the soldiers to be cut down and buried at once. So, Man and Band-Aid begin complying with the order. However, when Man is cutting down his soldier, he fails to notice its anemic face shift, and in a sudden movement, the corpse lurches forward, and it sinks its teeth into Man's shoulder. Band-Aid rushes over to help his fallen comrade, but things quickly go from bad to worse, because Man begins reactively, blindly firing, and he accidentally strikes down the medic in a hail of bullets. And with that, the scene chaotically fades to black. We pick back up some minutes later as Lieutenant Blake, Bronto, and Benitez stare over the dead body of Band-Aid, who is tightly tied up to a tree. Bronto really wants to go back to the helicopter pickup point and get the hell out of here, but Blake is adamant about observing the medic's corpse to see if anything happens. And they don't have to wait long, because the sterile body abruptly springs to life, gnashing its teeth and letting out an inhuman growl. And so the lieutenant immediately plants a bullet in the monster's skull. He then starts freaking out a bit, and he screams that they need to burn out all the surrounding villages right away. Bronto is absolutely ready to leave and cut out, but the lieutenant grabs him and tells him that if they don't stop the spread of this disease, or whatever it is, there's a distinct possibility that their base will eventually get overrun by these infected creatures. Bronto takes this all in, and he agrees to go along with the plan. So he picks up a makeshift stretcher, and he places the injured Man on it, and they continue on their way. 30 minutes later, and further into the jungle, the team is startled by the sound of anguished cries and weapon discharges. So Bronto leaves Man in the brush, and joins Lieutenant Blake and Benitez in getting a closer look at the ongoing situation. And frankly, it's a dire one. The entire village is already burning, with massive flames licking the dark skyline. But unfortunately, that's not all. No. Running around the inferno are Vietnamese men, quickly getting overwhelmed and eaten by a horde of ravenous zombies. It's obvious that the situation has spiraled way out of control, and the lieutenant orders Benitez to radio in for an immediate airstrike on the village while they still can. Benitez gets confirmation from the airmen over the radio that they can drop napalm in 3 minutes, but he only just barely manages to do so before he hears a terrible grrr behind him. And with that, the mustache man turns around to directly face the moldering man, who throws himself upon Benitez and chomps the flesh right out of the soldier's neck. In a last-ditch effort, Benitez fumbles around in his gear, extracting a grenade out and deftly pulling out the pin. The resulting explosion launches Bronto and Lieutenant Blake into the air, and the entire jungle seems to vibrate. The lieutenant tries to reorient himself amidst the loud ringing in his head, and he calls out for his comrade. However, he quickly discovers that Bronto was sadly flung into a Viet Cong booby trap. And what's more, behind him, in the tree line, are dozens of uncanny yellow eyes. Lieutenant Blake starts rapidly firing at them, with tears streaming down his face. And as he does this, Bronto desperately begs his friend to kill him. And so when the zombies get close enough, the lieutenant fires a single lone shot into the pitiful soldier. Meanwhile, the sky overhead roars with the sound of swooping military planes. Lieutenant Blake grimaces, and he puts his gun to his head. He thinks of his beloved Barbara one last time, and he pulls the trigger, but he receives nothing back but an empty click. Blake desperately turns out his pockets for ammo, panicking right up until the moment he finds what he's looking for. But, in a tragic irony, it's his lucky .68 bullet. However, the fates are biting and cruel, because we see that the lieutenant is never even able to load it into his weapon before being dragged away by the monsters. And as this happens, the airstrikes hit directly over them, condemning the scene to hellfire. After the impact smoke is cleared, a helicopter lands in the grass, ready to pick up the unit and take them back to base. The pilots can't locate any of the survivors at first, but then one of them eyes a lone figure at the edge of the tree line. And as the men rush out to support what they think is an injured man, we see that in actuality, it's no man at all. No, it's the putrid corpse of Lieutenant Blake, with his flesh peeling off his face and an eye hanging out of its socket. It's a dead man, yet it's a dead man still walking, and thus dramatically ends the first portion of 68. So, that one-shot story we just went through was published by Image Comics in 2006. It wouldn't be until 5 years later that all the creators were available at the same time once again, and a sequel could go forward. So, with that in mind, let's continue on to the next part. The story opens, once again, on February 13th, 1968, this time in the morning. And shooting yesterday's bullet into the ground are two familiar faces. It's Bronto and Lieutenant Blake, in a cameo appearance before the events of the last story. The two are interrupted by a higher-ranking officer named Captain Duncan. He's the guy with the mustache who's smoking a cigar. Duncan asks, "Don't you guys have some place to be?" And the men salute him affirmatively. And from there we pan out and see the base they're on, known as U.S. Firebase Ares. But in any case, the lieutenant and Bronto march off on what we know will be a fateful mission, and as they're doing so, the base's resident doctor strides up to Captain Duncan and asks where the two are going and why them. Duncan responds, of course, that they're on a rescue mission for soldiers who have gone missing, and he shares that he only sent the lieutenant because he's really the best man they got. But that's not the only team the captain is sending into the field. No, he's also deploying another team into the jungle on a search and destroy mission, and we'll return to them in a minute.
As for now, as the captain blissfully drinks his coffee, completely out of the blue, a bullet whizzes by and goes right through his mug. Duncan lets out an angry roar, yelling for a soldier named Corporal Love, who is the base's sniper. The captain is uber pissed, as he ordered Love to kill a rival Vietnamese guy hiding in the trees hours earlier. Love stammers out that he did, but the guy is strangely in the exact same place as before. Captain Duncan barks at him to stop being a fucking idiot and actually shoot the bastard dead for real this time. However, when Love looks through the scope, he quickly discovers that the Viet Cong guy don't look quite right. And I'm not talking about that haircut. Love jolts back in shock, but the captain screams at him to take the fucking shot, and so he does, sniping the creep right between the eyes. A short while later, we transition over to the second fire team from before, and we meet its principal character, a young Asian American kid in glasses named Private Yam. Right now, Yam is composing a letter to his parents, detailing the terrible experiences he's having over in Vietnam. Apparently, everyone in the entire platoon either treats him as a joke or with outright contempt because, well, he's Asian, and he superficially looks like the enemy. And the saddest part of it is that Yam's sergeant, a guy who goes by the name Mix, he's the cruelest to him of them all. The sergeant belittles and insults Yam in front of everyone on a constant basis, and Yam speculates that he hates all Asians because his close friends were killed by a suicide bomber in Saigon. Be that as it may, though, remember, this is the team that's on a search and destroy mission, and right now they've just been discovered by the Viet Cong, who initiate a firefight. The two sides exchange bullets, but the Americans manage to prevail, lighting up the enemy with hot lead. Afterward, the soldiers clear the area, and after their combat dog starts barking up a storm, they discover a Viet Cong entrance tunnel. By the way, the dog's name is Nero. Oh god, not this shit again. Anyway, because Yam is the smallest and is Asian like the enemy, the sergeant forces him to be the one to crawl in the tunnel and look around. And so he does, entering the underground tunnel with a brave face. He finds nothing at first, only some random supply crates. But then, most unexpectedly, a Vietnamese girl pops out of nowhere and forces Yam to quickly retreat. Meanwhile, on the surface, the rest of the soldiers cringe as the smell of rotting meat fills their nostrils. One of the men lights up a cigarette, but when his back is turned, a drooling zombie staggers up behind him and starts forcefully gnawing on the guy's neck. But not only that, the savage also inadvertently pulls the pin out of her grenade, instigating an enormous and fiery explosion. And underground, the seismic boom shakes the entire tunnel up, and part of the ceiling starts collapsing. So, needless to say, Yam is ready to get the hell out of there, and this feeling is only heightened when a mummified hand bursts through the wall, grabbing the kid's face. Yam manages to shoot it off, but he then sees several more of the hands up ahead of him, so he takes his K-bar knife out and starts hacking off limbs like he's a machine in a Chinese industrial factory. He next crawls into that Viet Cong supply room from earlier, and he sees the zombies eating that girl too, and so he starts blasting the bastards until they're dead. Again. Yam then lets out a rabbit he finds in a cage, because he thinks it will easily find the way out, and he can follow it. And it actually works out, I guess. And the kid manages to reach the surface via one of the tunnel's escape hatches. He finds Nero up there, stiff and growling low. Something's clearly not right. But before Yam can even catch his breath, the earth beneath him splits with a thunderous crack, and from the depths rises a zombie rat king monstrosity, made up of dozens of hastily buried bodies that rotted together and fused into one hideous mass. Yam begins firing at this monster, but his small weapon is not doing any real damage to this thick boy. Amidst the chaos, Nero valiantly leaps onto the beast, biting into it. However, most interestingly, the zombie appears only interested in humans, and not animals, so it tosses the dog backwards into a tree. Yam dives onto the ground and sees half a corpse crawling toward him, so he shoots it, and he steals its rocket launcher it was carrying. And he steadies himself and fires at the Rat King. And it, of course, explodes, raining down viscera and organs. Nero's back too, and he's alright. And even though he just had zombie flesh in his mouth, Yam lets him lick his face. Whatever the case, Yam doesn't know what to do next, so he decides to try to find his way back to base. However, the final thing he hears before the scene shifts is the voice of Sergeant Mix, crying out in anguish for help. From there, we check back in at Firebase Ares, where the base doctor walks in on Captain Duncan, praying. The doctor is surprised, as he never took Duncan as the religious type, but the captain replies that it's more of a foxhole faith. Regardless, right now the doctor is deeply disturbed and sweating, and he tells the captain that there's something in the medical bunker that he needs to see. He's been using it as a morgue for the dead bodies of American soldiers. However, 2 of the guys he just stuffed into body bags are now trying to forcibly crawl out of them. The captain cannot believe his eyes at first, but he swiftly shoots the undead men in the head, killing them once again. In a calm voice, he asks the doctor how this is possible, but the doc responds that this is obviously beyond all medical science, and more in line with that foxhole religion of his. Captain Duncan nods, and tells the doctor that he has to gather up all the troops and announce to them the current situation. That situation being that soon, it might not just be the Viet Cong or North Vietnamese army trying to kill them. It may soon be their own friends as well. To be completely honest, a lot of these guys seem to be taking this crazy shit rather lightly. Whatever the case, we do a hard cut over to a completely new setting with new characters. It's still February 13th, 1968, but it's just in the afternoon now, and in Cambodia. We see a young woman complaining about having to wear a helmet because it is ruining her hair. And we also see a cameraman fucking off and zooming in on her chest. But they are quickly corrected by a serious man in sunglasses named Mr. Rule, who puts them in their place and gets the show rolling here. And that show is the filming of a bombshell Hollywood actress who is doing anti-war propaganda and posing with carefully framed sets and props. But Mr. Rule isn't watching and he isn't interested. He tells his number 2 to make sure that those morons get the footage they need because he's taking the helicopter off to quote-unquote scout locations. So Rule walks up to 2 pilots who are rifling through the actress's food supplies, marveling at the audacity to bring Pinot Noir and caviar to Southeast Asia. In any event, Mr. Rule tells them to take him to a set of coordinates where a U.S. Army helicopter will be waiting for him. The pilots tell the man absolutely not, because they were specifically tasked by the United Nations only with flying the crew around to different filming locations. But then, Rule simply flashes a CIA special agent badge, revealing that he's actually deep undercover, and not actually with the news media or with Hollywood. So the UN guys comply, and they all take off, and the pilots shake their head at this absolute insanity. Mr. Rule laughs, though, and he tells the crew to go ahead and dig in on all the fine cuisine, while he reads over some highly classified material. And I guess the first leg of the CIA man's mission went well, because the next time we see him, he's already abruptly on the second U.S. chopper. They fly over hundreds of Vietnamese men who all seem to be rushing toward the direction of Firebase Ares, which is also the place Mr. Rule is actually going to. One of the soldiers on the plane turns to Mr. Rule with a smirk on his face, and he asks if they should go ahead and mow down these men. Rule tells him absolutely not, as they are flying way too low, and some of them are carrying rocket launchers. But the soldier thinks it would be kind of funny and epic, so he opens fire anyway, massacring several of the Vietnamese. And what do you know? One of them manages to fire off their rocket launcher at them, and it hits the tail of their helicopter, causing it to start spiraling downwards to the ground. Meanwhile, as that is happening, we return to Private Yam and see what he's up to. Well, he's located Sergeant Mix, who has fallen into and has been impaled by a Viet Cong spike trap. Yam looks down contemptuously at his tormentor, and after the man starts hurling slurs and expletives at him, Yam coldly walks away. But something gnaws at him, and before he leaves for good, he pauses. He can't leave the sergeant for dead like this without even trying to help. He's just not that guy. So, Yam returns, and he asks Sergeant Mix one last time to tell him what his name is. No derogatory nicknames, his real name. And so the sergeant complies, and Yam sighs, and he works on rescuing the sergeant. And though Private Yam still doesn't like his sergeant, the man is incredibly grateful to have been saved, and he considers them equals now. Sergeant Mix then tells this bizarre and fucked up story that you can pause and read for yourself, I guess. It gets interrupted anyway by a smoking chopper crashing through the sky. Wow, seems familiar. Yeah, so the two decide they need to get back to base as soon as possible, as it appears to be in immediate danger, because the dead walk again, and unfortunately, there's a lot of dead in Vietnam. Apropos of that, we revisit the UN-sponsored activist film set in Cambodia, where the actress is currently getting munched on by a zombie that's also copying a feel for some reason. Anyway, so the issue ends with us seeing that a massive horde of the undead have brutally slaughtered and eaten the entire film crew.
While I have you, I might as well let you know about my YouTube membership. While I have you, I might as well let you know about my YouTube membership program. You can support the channel. For just $1.99 a month, you can support the channel and get access to a special loyalty badge next to your name,
instead of exclusive
videos, community emojis, and a set of exclusive community emojis. I quite like the smiling cross guy
goes a long way in helping create more videos.
Just a little goes a long way in helping create more videos. But enough with that. Let's get back to the video. But enough with that. Let's get back to the video.
Alright, we're back now for issue number 3 of 68, the 2011 series. Fair warning, it's kind of a strange one. Pretty much none of it has any relevance to the established story. Instead, it rather exists to show us what's going on concurrently in the United States. For that reason, I'll probably be a bit more brief and general here than normal. Anyway, so we return to Firebase Ares, where Captain Duncan watches a man being supported into the base. It's Mr. Rule, the sole survivor of that helicopter crash. The captain wants eyes on him and deigns to quickly ascertain who the stranger is and what he wants. But for now, our focus shifts to a band of grunts who are ribbing one of their young comrades who is writing a letter to a girl he loves back at home, named Sherry. Things in Vietnam have been rough, and he knows they're going to get worse. But the thought of this girl is the only thing keeping him going, and he misses her terribly. And so we actually transition over to this Sherry girl, all the way back into Berkeley, California. Right now, she's reading over the soldiers' letters in a shitty apartment with another girl, all the while the news station blaring in the background. But then some hippie douchebag strolls into the room, telling the girls to get dressed, because they're going to a protest. It appears that Cherry has been having relations with this jabroni for some time now, and it's heavily implied that the women here are trading sex for drugs and shelter. Whatever the case, though, a different man shows up at their front door, telling them that things are heating up on campus and they need to go now. But because he's a black guy, the greasy hippie tries way too hard to be cool, and the black guy tells him to shut his cracker ass up and show him the gun he told him to bring. And the hippie does so with a proud look on his face. So they all go down to UC Berkeley, where there's this massive anti-war protest going down, opposite a line of police officers, decorated in anti-riot gear. Amidst the crowd, the black guy finds one of his brothers, who excitedly tells him that he thinks this protest is going to be massive. You see, over a police scanner, the guy's cousin heard reports of wild riots breaking out across the county. Apparently, in the last 24 hours, there has been an unprecedented amount of assaults, vandalism, and violence, even biting, and the theft of bodies from the morgue. I guess that is all good news for these nihilist guys, and one of them turns to the hippie and asks, "You got your shit tight, white boy?" And the whitey cheerfully responds, Heck yeah, brother man." Yeah, this guy's definitely trying to get the pass, if you know what I mean. Anyway, hippie here pulls out his gun, and he's ready to kill a cop, but Sherry grabs onto the barrel, desperately pleading for him to stop. He isn't listening, though, and amid the tussle, he inadvertently shoots Sherry straight through the chest. Nice going, dumbass. The black guy isn't about to let a good crisis go to waste, so he instantly yells out that the cops just murdered a white woman, so all hell breaks loose, and the two sides start pelting shit at each other, and before you can even blink, the protest has turned into a war zone. And amid the insanity, Sherry, or at least the shell of what she once was, it comes back to life, and it rips the flesh out of some random people's necks. The black guy sees all this, and he tries to bail, but he winds up tripping and falling face first into a pile of human intestines. He screams in fear, as several pairs of hands seize onto him, and they begin to live dissect the guy in a pretty gruesome display. So long, Robespierre. So, yeah, the zombie apocalypse is here in America, and all sides and stripes have succumbed to it. Rather poetically, perhaps. Oh, and as for that hippie guy, yeah, he gets his shit rocked later on off-panel, I guess. Anyway, this clusterfuck issue concludes with us seeing Private Yam and Sergeant Mix, visually, but there is a conversation overlaid on top of it between Mr. Rule and Captain Duncan. I guess I'll relay the conversation details first. Basically, Mr. Rule tells the captain about the hundreds of Vietnamese fighters he flew over heading their way. But not only that, Mr. Rule also reveals his secret CIA mission that brought him here in the first place. As it turns out, he's hunting down this genius neurosurgeon named Dr. Nguyen Murnau, who apparently has a history of conducting insane experiments on organic test subjects. But you don't have to worry about that shit, though. I don't think it comes up again until like 3 more miniseries down the line. Whatever the case, as it pertains to Yam and the Sergeant, well, they're sneaking around in the jungle. However, unfortunately, Sergeant Mix winds up stepping on a landmine that eviscerates his body in an instantaneous explosion. And with that, this fragmented portion of our story wraps up with the arrival of the Vietnamese caravan to Firebase Ares. Dozens upon dozens of the enemy line up at the perimeter, but they're not here to fight. No, they're all waving white flags. They're surrendering. And that brings us now to the final issue of the miniseries. I'm sorry for this interjection here, but things are noticeably less disjointed, and I had to signal that narrative break somehow. Anyway, we return to Yam and Nero, who are fighting and running for their lives in an open plain. Several zombies are onto them, and just when all hope seems lost, 3 hidden Vietnamese guys spring out of the tall grass wielding AK-47s. Luckily, the men are not interested in Yam, and they're there to kill the undead. So Yam scrambles up a tree, but because Nero cannot get up there, he tells the K9 to go back home to Firebase Ares. And as for the Vietnamese guys, yeah, they end up getting decapitated, stabbed, and ultimately eaten. From there, we transition over again to the military base. It's finally February 14th at this point, at 4 o'clock in the morning. We see Captain Duncan conferring with the head NFA officer, devising a plan that stations all the Vietnamese militants around the perimeter of the base, basically as a shield. The doctor thinks all of this is rather inhumane, but worst of all, it's futile. He has not been taking the outbreak well, and he's unraveling under the pressure and pretty much perpetually drunk. The captain tells him to get his shit together, though, and says that of course he's using the enemy as human shields, as they had just pulled the Tet offensive off like a month ago, and he doesn't really trust them. The doctor walks off, and then Mr. Rule goes on this long-winded and pointless screed about how he's not even sure he believes in this whole undead rising again thing, as he's never actually seen them yet. But as soon as those dumbass words are out of his mouth, a pungent smell wafts over the base, as what must be thousands of zombies coalesce around the base. And so the final battle begins, and it's hell on earth. Yam is nearby at this point, and he's dashing off one last letter to his family that he knows they'll never be able to read. He writes that he doesn't know what these creatures are or what they've done to deserve this, but it might just be the end of the world. And while the men at Firebase Ares are not his friends, they are his brothers, so he's going to go live or die with them. And so the battle rages on. The zombies walk directly into the base's defensive claymore mines with 0 inhibitions. But because they can only be killed by shots to the head, they continue to drag their mangled bodies ever closer to the living. With that, the Vietnamese on the perimeter are rapidly overwhelmed in a terrible bloodbath. Captain Duncan orders for someone to get him a radio immediately, as everyone around him panics, as the zombie incursion penetrates the base proper. Mr. Rule is knocked onto his back, and he damn near gets killed, and it is there where he also encounters Nero, who hurtles onto the scene, and the two run further into the center of the base. There, they find the captain pounding on the hospital door that the doctor has barricaded himself behind. Exasperated, Captain Duncan seizes onto the radio and shouts into it that he needs every single combat aircraft in the area routed to Firebase Ares at once. He orders a total code red, directing them to drop any rocket, missile, or chemical weapon they got over the area. Nobody's making it out of this one alive, but perhaps they can take all the dead with them in one fell swoop. The command successfully goes through, but immediately after, several zombies lunge at our heroes, some of them swinging razor-sharp scythes. Unfortunately, as the captain is dispatching with one of them, another one sneaks up behind him, and it savagely bites into his elbow. Captain Duncan reels in pain, but then his eyes grow wide. He recognizes this brute. It's the zombified Lieutenant Thomas Blake from the original one-shot. Apparently the two were pretty close because the captain goes rigid and he starts sobbing. Mr. Rule is unable to rouse him, so he and Nero take off. The captain looks into the sky and howls, belching out about how sorry he is, right as hundreds of rockets pelt the firebase. Both the dead and the undead are instantly ignited, and the living let out blood-curdling screams as the very flesh melts off their faces. And with that, the scene ultimately fades to black. 2 hours later, the bruised eyes of Private Yam flutter open. He's alive, somehow. But not just him, the doctor's there too. It turns out they're on a helicopter, routed for an airport in Saigon, from which they can hopefully fly back home. The doctor tells Yam that there were only 5 survivors, and 3 of them are on this chopper. That being the 2 of them, and the profoundly injured Captain Duncan, who is non-responsive and missing limbs. The other 2 survivors were actually Mr. Rule and Nero, who we're told formed an immediate bond, and apparently Mr. Rule took the dog with him into the jungle on his CIA mission for that mysterious neurosurgeon he's looking for. As for now, though, our heroes in the copter sadly discover that escaping Vietnam is not going to be an easy task, as they fly over the city of Saigon, which is practically an inferno. The only building they can safely land on is the US Embassy, but there's already another plane circling by, and there's also a mass of the dead trying to force their way onto the roof. But things quickly go from bad to worse when the figure of Captain Duncan slowly sits up and utters out a low growl. The doctor notices immediately, and he pushes Yam out of the helicopter onto the roof, and he starts wildly firing at the captain. And this mayhem quickly culminates in the 2 helicopters crashing into each other with a loud boom. I gotta be honest, I feel like they should have seen Duncan coming back as a zombie beforehand. Anyway, Yam picks up 2 M4s that are laying on the roof, I guess, and he instinctively opens fire on the zombie horde facing him. And so the series ends on a cliffhanger, with a radio operator telling him to hang on, because there's people inbound and they're coming to get whoever's there. And so we're left with a promised continuation of the series in a book called 68 Scars. But as for us, as for this moment, thus concludes the first arc in the 68 saga.
Kowalski, analysis.
So, that was 68. What did you guys think of it? Like I said, if you guys want me to continue the series, please make your voices heard in the comment section down below. If there's enough interest, I will rush out the next chapter as quickly as I can. But until then, let's do some analysis here. Right, so this is about to be a little weird and kind of meta, not gonna lie. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of places you could take a serious analysis of this book to. I mean, in terms of the dead coming back to life in Vietnam specifically. Like, the men killed on both sides, any sins done, they literally come back to haunt you. Likewise, as it pertains to the outbreak in America, one could absolutely devise a metaphor there about how the soldiers returning home are not quite the same. They have brought a certain corrupting darkness back home with them. Right, I could say all of that, but I'm not so sure that I would completely believe it. You see, in my last video about Caligula, there was this rather invective comment someone left, basically accusing me of having superficial analyses. They had a metaphorical interpretation of the Caligula story, and they chastised me for not picking up on it in the same way. And this is the part where the dilemma comes in, because, as I told them in reply, I personally usually stray away from such modes of analysis. Sure, I could come up with all these flowery interpretations, but like I said, I'm not sure I would actually believe them. And this would be because, in my thinking, such interpretations would likely be less so what the creators had in mind or were thinking about, and would instead be more so personal, individual headcanons, in essence. And look, I don't have a formal background in literature or critical analysis or anything, and maybe that's what they do over there. Maybe that's standard fare. I don't know. But in my mind, in the absence of any proportionate authorial evidence, certain grand interpretations of books feel like baseless fan fiction to me. So, can I really assert then, in good faith, that the zombies in 68 are meant to be reflections or manifestations of wartime cruelty and inhumanity? Seemingly not. But what's really funny and ironic is that I say all of this while also having been accused of overinterpretation myself. For instance, there's this comment I read on my Fatal Englishman video that basically told me I was overthinking it, and it wasn't really that deep. So, how do I thread this contradiction? Like, I'm being confused of, shallowness and overinterpretation. Like, how do I thread this dissonance? I don't know. I guess I would say that I think that when it comes to media analysis, we have the capability to turn any aspect of the art into a springboard for practically an infinite amount of questions and conversations. And I think that's largely what I try to do. And I think that distinguishes me from others who potentially manufacture subtext where there isn't any, and whose analysis basically boils down to them, spinning subjective interpretations into what they would like to be objective proclamations. But nevertheless, let's leave all of that aside for now. And let's go instead to see what the creators of the 68 comic have said about their own work. Okay. I'm pulling from an interview the primary writer and co-creator Mark Kidwell did with a publication called Digital Spy in 2010. In it, the interviewer asks, what zombie fiction inspired the undead in 68? And Kidwell responds that we're sticking pretty close to the model that has inspired absolutely all zombie fiction in film to date. And by that, I mean Romero and Russo's original creation, Night of the Living Dead. Those guys created the whole horror subgenre by twisting Richard Matheson's vampiric virus concept from his classic novel I Am Legend and converting the vampires into shambling, cannibalistic ghouls. Their creation was born in 1968, a product of the cinematic maturing process spawned by the darkening of American reality. The Vietnam conflict played a big part in that national mood swing toward grimmer, dystopian storytelling, and its effects can be seen in the films of that period. Right, so the creators were heavily inspired by George A. Romero's classic 1968 zombie film, Night of the Living Dead. And that's interesting, and I'm glad they said that. In another interview, which will also be linked in the description, they also shared that the zombie rules in the 68 universe are also identical to that of Romero's, which is to say that beyond just spreading the infection via bite, anyone who dies for any reason after the apocalypse start date becomes a zombie, regardless of prior contact. Anyway, returning to the Digital Spy interview, they next ask what led to the Vietnam setting specifically, and Kidwell says that it was the dawning of the realization, on me at least, that the first time the world saw the hungry dead was indeed 1968. Once this came to the forefront of my mind, I just started asking myself, what else was going on in 1968? The answer was obvious. We were fighting and dying in a faraway jungle, mired in a war that nobody understood, and facing an enemy that had taken on almost supernaturally mysterious proportions. It was simply a matter of moving the camera's focus from the idea of seeing the monstrous dead rise in our own backyards to zooming in on the blood-drenched tropical trails and battlefields of South Vietnam. Just the sheer number of daily dead dictates that as soon as the virus takes hold, you're dealing with legions of reanimated monsters. So he basically connected and combined the real-world debut of Hollywood zombies in 1968 to the Vietnam War, which was going on at the exact same time. And while those two events may have been rather mere coincidence, historically speaking, here the 68 creators explicitly synchronize the two events. And that's not a bad idea. It harkens back to earlier discussions, like we had in Black Gas, about zombies as representations of a broad, shifting fear. And this is a recurrent, frequently drawn from in horror studies, from what I understand. I mean, God knows the amount of ink spilled writing about how Dracula or Frankenstein are othering stand-ins. But yeah, I'll wrap this review portion of the video up. In short, I enjoyed the 68 comic. It was a little bit all over the place sometimes, but it clearly had care put into it, and it had some interesting things to say. I quite liked these historical fact pages they had at the end of every issue. Apparently also, they actually used a Vietnam War veteran as a kind of consultant on the series, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that about does it for today's video. I want to thank you guys for helping me reach 10k subscribers recently. It's nice that we have formed a community around such dark material. It's quite nice. And I'll always be here if you are. But until next time, I will thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.